Hi, I'm Sarah, and I am going to talk with you about multi-track editing in Adobe Audition. Now, I'm going to show you the files that I have prepared here for use in our multi-track editing. I never use my original files when I'm going to go into editing. I've already prepared the ingredients, so to speak, and I have cut and normalized the bytes that I want to use. All my original raw files remain in a separate folder. They don't get touched in this process. That way, if you have some sort of catastrophic editing meltdown, you still have all your raw audio and nothing's been changed in it. All right, so I am going to drag the audio that I want to be able to edit into my bin over here on the left-hand side. And I'm dragging over the .wav files, not PKF files. PKF files exist, but they have no meaning for you in this process. So don't by mistake delete your .wav file and keep your PKF files because you'll be very sad. All right, here I am in Adobe Audition, and I'm going to click on Multitrack. It's going to ask me to name my session, and I'm going to name it Practice. Now here you see multi-track. It's obviously different from the waveform because there are multiple tracks, thus the name. All right, I'll show you my script, which is actually on my other screen, but that's what I'm going to be using to guide me. This is a correctly formatted script, and it's basically a roadmap to how I'm going to assemble this audio. So you'll have your script prepared. And what I'm going to do first is going to bring over my voice because we start on my voice. And this is my voice track as one long track, and I'm going to divide it up here. So I'm going to go through and looking at my script, I'm going to figure out where I'm going to make the cuts in this voicing track. So I'm going to press the space bar to play.
A late summer breeze is blowing across the lawns of suburban Jefferson City, Missouri, and over a small garden next to an elementary school.
All right, so that's my first bit of audio, and I'm gonna have a bite after that. So I zoomed in by clicking my little plus magnifying glass, and I'm gonna select my razor tool because I wanna make a definite cut here. So I razor it, and then I press V, which gets me back, shortcuts me to my little slider, and I'm putting a little space in there. So I know that that's where I'm gonna drop my first bite of my interviewee talking.
That's Carol David of the Missouri Prairie Foundation. She helped create this native plant garden. The caterpillar is stuffing itself. Monarch butterfly caterpillars need milkweed. It's the only food they eat, and in less than 2 weeks, they grow to 2,000 times their original mass. Caterpillars hatched in the late summer and early fall are the longest-lived monarch generation. If they're born east of the Rocky Mountains and make it to adulthood, the deep orange and black butterflies take off along the monarch flyways that stretch for thousands of miles, from Canada down through the U.S. and into Mexico, where they winter in the Sierra Madre Mountains. 2013 saw the lowest butterfly count there since recording began in the 90s. Conservation groups are now focusing on the lack of milkweed and its impact on monarch populations.
Okay, so that's where I want to cut. You can just press M to put a marker in for yourself, which is incredibly handy when you want to remind yourself where something important happened or where you want to cut. Then I get my razor tool, I cut here, I press V to get my slider back. And some of these things have different shortcuts than the shortcuts that I'm using, but you sort of develop your own personal preferences and habits when you work with editing tools for a certain period of time. All right, so I know that's where my next bite is going to go. And if I right click up here at the top of the marker, I can name it, I can delete it, I can do lots of things with the markers. They're extremely useful.
Ecologist Chip Taylor heads Monarch Watch at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. His offices are filled with hundreds of little plastic containers of monarch caterpillars, snacking on a leaf paste and breeding butterflies batting their wings in net cages. Taylor says it used to be that farm fields were a great source of milkweed, but in the past decade or so, more targeted use of herbicides, edge-to-edge row crops, and development resulted in dramatic milkweed loss. The Missouri Prairie Foundation is trying to stem that.
All right. Oh, I missed where I want it to cut this. Hang on. So I'm looking at my script, monarch population.
Breeding butterflies, batting their wings in net cages. Taylor says it used to be that farm fields were a great source of milkweed, but in the past decade or so, more targeted use of herbicides. Conservation groups are now focusing on the lack of milkweed and its impact on monarch populations.
Oh, no, I was right. There's my break there.
Ecologist Chip Taylor heads Monarch Watch at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. His offices are filled with hundreds of little plastic containers of monarch caterpillars, snacking on a leaf paste and breeding butterflies, batting their wings in net cages. Taylor says it used to be that farm fields were a great source of milkweed, but in the past decade or so, more targeted use of herbicides, edge-to-edge row crops, and development resulted in dramatic milkweed loss. The Missouri Prairie Foundation is trying to stem that, as is Kansas-based Monarch Watch. It plans to distribute 300,000 milkweed plants next year. In Iowa, the Tallgrass Prairie Center is encouraging farmers and large landowners to plant milkweed and other native prairie plants. Karen Oberhauser is with the conservation umbrella group Monarch Joint Venture. She says that while she doesn't see monarch extinction as an imminent threat, the shrinking population puts the butterfly's spectacular migration at risk.
All right.
The need for diversity.
That's where my third bite is going to come in. So I am going to razor there. So that's my space. Move this over. And then I have made the cuts where I want to place my bites. And I also put a marker in here. You can see it. It's this marker here where I want to put in some ambi. So I've sort of created a guideline for myself here, and this is going to make my life significantly easier as I go forward. So I want to see how the whole thing looks here, and I actually want to scoot everything slightly to the right. So with my drag tool here, which is sort of the cross with the arrows pointing in different directions, I can highlight everything and scooch it over a little bit. All right, so I want to start with my plant ambi. So I'm dragging that in here, and I put it on a different track from my voicing. So you can hear the ambi here. There are some birds chirping, etc., etc. And I want to take a closer look at this. So I double click on it and I go in and I can really see what that ambi looks like. And I can, for example, push the levels up on the whole thing, push them down with this dial here. So there's a lot of ways you can influence this audio when you double click into it. Now, when you're operating in this single track, you are actually altering the file. If I did this in the multitrack, I would not be altering this original piece that I've placed into multitrack, but when I'm in the single track, I am in fact altering that original file. So that's something to be aware of. Are you making a change that can be undone really easily, or are you actually fundamentally altering that file? Say I just wanted to play up this bird chirping part, I could highlight that and just push that part up. That would sound extremely odd if you did it that extremely, but it's a possibility. All right, so now I'm going to go back to my multitrack here. And you can also do that if you're in double click into one, you can just click back on multitrack and it takes you back to your multitrack. So let's say I want to do a very slight fade up into this ambi here. People tend to get really excited about fades and overuse them doing things like this. I want to do an incredibly slight fade. So I use this little square here and I can just drag it to increase or decrease my fade. I could also do this in a different way. Let's say I didn't want to do this sort of really long gradual fade using the line. I can place points on this yellow line that runs across the piece of audio, and I can use those points to pull the audio up or down. So that's another way to have this really nuanced control of what your audio is doing. In this case, I'm going to do this very slight fade at the front so the sound doesn't come up really hard. And then as soon as I start speaking, I'm going to let the ambi run, but I'm going to push it down significantly so it doesn't compete with the voicing. And then I'm going to fade it very slightly on the back end, fade it down here too. All right, so now I want this piece of audio. This is my first bite, and I'm gonna place this here. Here's the ambi, here's my first bit of voicing, and here's my first person coming in to talk. So I'm gonna drag this so you can see there's good transition here. Let's listen to it.
A late summer breeze is blowing across the lawns of suburban Jefferson City, Missouri, and over a small garden next to an elementary school.
Okay, so we're standing here next to this swamp milkweed, which is very robust, about 4 feet tall. And I'm seeing a small monarch caterpillar on the underside of one of the leaves.
That's Carol David of
Okay, so she sort of is cut somewhat abruptly there at the end. So I want to go in and take a closer look at this piece of audio. And if I look really closely, I can see this intake of her breath at the end, which gives that bite this bizarre unfinished feeling.
One of the leaves.
So I'm going to push this in ever so slightly by going to the edge and using the arrow that points toward the center of the bite.
One of the leaves.
Okay, and now I see I want this piece of voice to come in a little more immediately.
Side of one of the leaves.
That's Carol David.
All right, and that sounds much better because she's not intaking a breath that makes you think something's going to keep happening. And at this point, I keep this ambi running. It's almost like room tone. It's very low. It runs under everything she says and sort of allows me to blend her voicing in with my voicing, studio voicing. It's perfectly quiet other than my voice. She's talking to me in a garden, so there's a dog barking in the distance. There's all this ambient sound happening, and this is ambient sound that I separately recorded from that place, and it allows a really nice blending, so you don't have this sudden feeling of something happening. All right, so now I see that my next person who's going to speak is Taylor, so I bring that in here. Excuse me, I place it. And then I move my voicing around it. So let's listen to see how that sounds.
Populations.
1.5 billion. We need that many stems out there. And that's going to take about 20 million acres of habitat restoration, which would, if we accomplish that, be the biggest restoration program that has ever been attempted.
Ecologist Chip Taylor.
And you can sort of get way too involved with the amount of time between when your interviewee stops talking and you start talking. If it's too long, it's this awkward conversational pause that makes people uncomfortable. And if it's too short, it sounds rushed, but there's no perfect measurement for that. You just sort of have to listen to it and find what sounds natural. And this is where you can burn hours upon hours, sort of trying to find exactly the right balance
that has ever been attempted.
Ecologist Chip Taylor.
Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to move on to my ambi that I'm going to place in here.
Heads Monarch Watch at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. His offices are filled with hundreds of little plastic containers of monarch caterpillars, snacking on a leaf paste and breeding butterflies batting their wings in net cages.
All right, so I'm talking about butterflies batting their wings. So wouldn't it be nice to hear some butterflies bat their wings? So I'm going to go and get my wings ambi. Here it is. So I want to give that ambi a little space to breathe and be heard. So I'm going to razor in a tiny space here where that wings ambi can exist all on its own. I'm going to move it in a little over here. So that audio that was here, you can, when you're editing, bring it in and out like this. So if you're not ready to make a definite cut with like you do with razoring, you can also just sort of roll your audio in, roll your audio out, and this gives you some flexibility to manipulate it. So I'm going to want this to fade a little, and I'm going to want it to peak here and to continue a little onward on both sides. So let's see how this sounds.
Batting their wings in net cages. Taylor says it used to be.
Okay, I want to give that a little more space. I'm going to slide this to the right.
Batting their wings in net cages. Taylor says it used to.
Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm going to extend this on a little more, let it fade down slightly more. And we are almost finished with this. We have one more person with a bite to get in here. You'll see this X. It's because I moved this audio over and it's began to overlap with the next piece. So that's how it's letting you know that you've overlapped. I'm actually going to move this down because I tend to like to have my voicing on one track, the bites on another track, and my ambi on another track. But I think there's a lot of personal preference involved in this. Maybe somewhere there's somebody who can tell you definitively the best way to do that. But for me, it's very related to my personal preference and what helps me mentally organize things. So there's my last bite. Let's see how that sounds.
Migration at risk.
The Eastern North American migration could disappear to the point that it's not really noticeable. I mean, there might still be some monarchs doing it, but it would disappear as an incredible natural phenomenon.
The need for diverse native...
And I like those spaces between her audio and where my voicing comes back in. So if you look at this overall, this is a pretty simple story. We've got two pieces of ambi that come in. They smooth the transition between voicing and our bite here, brings up a bit of a scene here right in the middle. We have 3 bites of interviews and your voicing. So this is a multi-track that involves lots of different skills. You can see how my audio levels are fairly consistent. This one looks different because it's a phone interview and you can see that it was a little high and the audio clipped there, unfortunately. But before I brought everything into multi-track, I went in and I normalized it. So the way that you normalize is you go to effects. Sorry, this isn't my actual computer, so I'm confused. I'm going to go to amplitude and compression, normalize, which is a process. It gets this whole audio. I normally normalize to 85, but some of that depends on the audio that I'm working with. So if you normalize all your pieces to the same level before you begin this process, you won't end up with audio that has wildly varying levels and that you then have to go in and work really hard to modulate correctly. If you do this ahead of time, it's going to make this process of putting something together nice and easy because everything has been prepared. It's like if you're going to bake a cake and you get halfway through it and find out you need to go out in the yard and get some eggs from your chickens. It's going to be more time consuming than if you have all your ingredients prepared and ready to roll. Now, I am going to save my multi-track. Yes, I want to copy it into the sessions folder. Yes, I want to save all the changes. In general, I'll try to just be in my session and finish my project and export it, because if you forget that you have a session file going on and you move things around in your original folders, they can become disconnected. So you could open this up and maybe all my voicing would be missing or all my ambi would be missing because something got moved and it's no longer communicating properly with my session. So if you do leave something in a session because you have to stop in the middle of your workflow, don't move your audio files around anymore. And if you are able to finish it, you just want to go ahead and export it. So I go to export, multi-track mixdown, entire session. All right. So 44100, 32-bit, .wave. And I'm going to call this, it names it your name of the file plus mixdown there, and you can choose where you want to save it. So I'm going to go ahead. Okay. And now this whole session will be saved as one .wave. So I've got that, my multi-track mixdown.